Next up on This Week in Law, we've got Larry Downs, Robert Scoble, me, and Evan Brown. We're going to let our freaky line fly. And what I mean by that is we're going to talk about a lot of privacy impacting new technologies and how the law may come to terms with them. We'll talk about cars as they get more contextual. What does that mean for you? We'll talk about drones and how long they're going to have to keep violating the FAA laws until the laws might change. We've got lots of great stuff on tap, including Google and Viacom finally resolving their suit, and popcorn time proliferating despite the fact that it's gone now. Lots more on This Week in Law. Next Week in Law? We're gazing into the future.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twill, This Week in Law with Denise Howell and Evan Brown. Episode 251, recorded March 21st, 2014. Hester Prynne versus Davy Crockett. Hi, folks. Denise Howell here, and you're joining us for This Week in Law. I'm so thrilled this week that we have two amazing guests who are going to help us understand everything about disruption and new technologies and where the law might get in the way or help those processes. We have the author of Big Bang Disruption, Larry Downs, joining us once again. Hello, Larry.
Denise, how are you?
Great to see you. Thank you so much for taking a break from your travels to travel to the studio and join us today.
Well, you know, I'm on this quest to find the proper configuration that will make me look as good as Evan Brown, and I don't think this quite does it, but it's a little closer.
You're looking great. Also joining us, we've got a three-person California panel plus Evan today. Robert Scoble is joining us for his first time on This Week in Law. We're thrilled to have you, Robert.
Thanks for having me on.
Robert, too, has a book in the works here. The Age of Context has just come out. There we go. Very good compliment to Larry's book as well. The two of you are writing about similar kinds of issues. So I think that we have a great opportunity to look at how new technologies that may strike people as freaky might attract the attention of legislators and regulators, and might have problems on that front, but might also have a way forward. So we'll get into that. Evan, of course, is with us as well. Evan Brown from Chicago, Illinois, and the Info Law Group. Hello, Evan.
Hi, Denise. Have no book to sell, but, sure I'm thrilled as well to be with you here to learn about disruption. This ought to be lots of fun. So really happy to be here. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Robert, you spend a lot of time in your book talking about the freaky line. And so I think, generally your book is a lot about privacy. So I think we're going to start with some privacy related stories. So let's go there. Let's go there first.
My book is really about the... go ahead.
Sorry.
I didn't know you.
Someone needs to talk over this bumper.
That's right.
It's all right.
We'll throw three bumpers at you during the show, and that's one of them.
My book is really about the good parts of the always surveilled world that we're heading into. You're going to soon walk into a grocery store, and there's going to be sensors around you that are going to watch you shop, to the point where it can tell that you're pulling a box of Cheerios off of the shelf and do things in real time because of that. Add points to your loyalty program, or say, hey, if you bought 3 boxes, you get a discount and stuff like that. And it's crazy how fast it's happening since we even published the book last September.
So tell us what you mean when you're talking about the freaky line.
Well, most people, I had dinner with the CTO of Ford at CES, and he said, our customer is Joey Bag of Donuts NASCAR fan, and they don't know the depths of which they can be surveilled. You look at what the Tesla can study about you, and if you turn on the right thing, it knows that you're doing donuts in the parking lot. It knows that where you are, whether you're at a grocery store parking lot or a strip club or a church or a school, right? And and Ford is like, wow, this is a new freaky area for us. We know we are probably going to need to go there because like Mercedes just announced a contextual car that does all sorts of stuff for you on behalf of this surveillance. But this is an over the freaky line world where we're not yet sure we want to go there. A lot of people are really struggling with this world where the phone is really stalking you full time and knows, even the sensors can know that you're holding it in your hand or that it's in your pocket or that you're walking or running or driving or biking. The Moves app already does this, right? And we're coming into an age where the operating system itself is really going to surveil you at a deep level, watch what you do, and serve you in a whole number of new ways.
Right, and this is obviously a good thing and a bad thing. There are certain wonderful things that this can facilitate that you write about in your book, ways of living that we just can't even really imagine today. Can you give us some examples of how, if the freaky line is managed properly and everyone's consent is adequately obtained and customers are kept comfortable with how their data is used, give us some examples of how it can vastly improve your life.
I mean, if we were doing this show, you know, back when Leo was on KGO radio in the early days, like 15 years ago, if we talked like, oh, we're going to give access to Gmail to third party or our email systems to third parties to study it, we would go, man, that is way over the freaky line for us. And yet today I have an app called TripIt, which I give access to my Gmail. So TripIt's a non-Google company looking into my email for things like airline tickets and hotels and other things about my travels, and is pulling them out and building a service around those things. But I was in a plane in Chicago at the gate, about to leave, and TripIt said, your flight's being canceled. Here's another flight out of town. Click, bought the ticket, got a new seat. And then 2 minutes later, the pilot comes on and says, you know, we're canceling the flight because of mechanical issues. We're going back to the gate, and the customer service people will help you out. There was only 3 seats out on that other flight. And so 100 and something people spent the night in Chicago. And that's a little example of this, hey, you got to give up privacy. I give TripIt access to my Gmail. I give it access to my credit cards. And it knows a lot about me. And then I get a lot of utility for that, giving up on my privacy. And that's just a little tiny example. This system is really going to serve you in a deep, deep way. I mean, you know, the Google Glass, which is I'm having trouble with it right now, but the code name of this was Wingman. The idea behind it was that as you live your life, it's going to serve you. It's going to tell you, hey, you better leave for your next meeting, or here's a better experience in life, or here's a friend who's trying to get a hold of you, that kind of thing. And we're going to see this kind of argument for several years as people decide whether or not to give up their privacy and give access to their email to various systems to do various things, right?
Right, and I think that everybody's idea of where the freaky line is drawn is a bit different. It's sort of a freaky continuum. For example, Evan with us today hasn't used Facebook in a very long time. Decided a while ago it was too freaky for him, right, Evan?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was a big part of it. Just so much information, and connecting dots and assembling pictures in the composite is pretty freaky to me. But there's also just ordinary everyday life issues, being able to exist more in the real space as well. But this is all intriguing because that's good that you're saying that, Denise, a freaky continuum, because there's that, and then it also seems like it's the line tends to move over time, it would seem.
Absolutely.
Like Robert was pointing out, back in the old days, the turning over the access to email is a big deal. Not so big anymore. We just project that out into the future. Our sensibilities are going to mature with the opportunities we have, it would seem, and just keeps the, we're always just sort of trailing that freaky line as it's moving off into the future, kind of like the rabbit at the dog races. You just keep chasing after that.
The freaky line's about to go really freaky in the next decade. I've seen pills already that you are going to swallow that are going to study you from the inside. These cameras are 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter. They can actually video you as they go through you, among other things. And the really bleeding edge futurists are even talking about eating a pill that's going to give you knowledge and give you intelligence. Wow. That's maybe 30 years away, but I could see how that's going to happen, right?
Well, tell us where you see that, because that's something that is really interesting to me, where nanotechnology could play a role in cognitive enhancement, cognitive development, communications, actually interfacing with the brain. What are some particulars you think could happen, Robert?
I at a research lab in Ireland, I saw little micro needles made out of silicon, which when you put your finger on them, they feel like sandpaper, so it doesn't hurt, but it can already pull a few cells of blood out of your skin to study it, to see whether you have diabetes, for instance. And if you're a diabetic right now, you have to prick your finger on a big needle. So this is good stuff. At SRI, I saw a system where you just read 200 words off of a card and it can tell whether or not you're suicidal or not. They're doing this work for the government because soldiers are coming back, military people are coming back with PTSD and are committing suicides at high rates. And so they want to identify those people and get them help. And all you have to do is read 200 words, and it's already about 70% accurate. This is not even putting something in my brain yet, right? This is just studying how I behave in the world, and it already is somewhat accurate. And as we learn more about how to interact with the brain and the brain sensors are coming down. In fact, I should have brought my brain sensor up here. I have a new brain sensor coming out this summer called Muse, which has several EEG sensors on it. Those sensors used to cost tens of thousands of dollars. Now it's $200 that you're going to be, or $300 that you're going to be able to buy a band that studies your brain in a new way and lets you play games with yourself, lets you do biofeedback kinds of things. So we're heading into a weird, always surveilled, really deeply integrated with your privacy world that's going to bring all sorts of new legal challenges, yeah.
So that's a good tee up to ask Larry, who's been focusing on how businesses find themselves put out of business by people who are more savvy about what the market wants or will accept. If everybody's freaky line is a little bit different, and if the societal norm one moves over time, what does that mean for businesses who think, well, we can't go there because it's just too far into where people's privacy radar goes off?
Yeah, well, I mean, as Evan said, the thing is that we tend to really adjust pretty quickly to what seems like something very freaky, even a very short time ago. And a lot of times, you can manage the introduction a little better than a lot of companies do. Facebook did a very bad job, for example, with Beacon. Google maybe has done a slightly better job with Google Glass. But of course, you're going to have to overcome that creepiness factor at some point. I always find, especially when we're talking about it from the policy perspective, it's very difficult to talk about privacy at all, particularly in the United States, because we have this kind of dichotomy between two very different ways of thinking about it in a very American sense. We have kind of the puritanical start, kind of the East Coast view of it, sort of the scarlet letter view, which is when you live in the village, you're completely transparent. Everybody knows everything about you, and that's the way the Puritans liked it. And then on the other side, you've got kind of the West Coast view, which is the frontier model. It's kind of Davy Crockett. When you want to leave and go somewhere else, you can sort of let your entire identity go by and start over and be pretty anonymous. And those two very different views of privacy have never really been rationalized in American life. So we often get these kind of conversations where, we talk about how wonderful some of these technologies are and what great things they're going to do for us. And then there's another part of our brain that kind of freaks out and runs for the hills. It's as we say, it doesn't, last very long, that creepiness factor either. If it's so creepy, the product just fails. And we've seen lots of examples of that in the last 10 years. But increasingly, we just get over it and we move on, and we forget that was the thing that freaked us out. There were still people, that when Gmail came out, that they were, asking the government to ban it because they thought the whole idea of software reading the mail and using the context to get ads was something that just shouldn't be allowed to exist at all.
So, Robert, you alluded to cars as being a big frontier for this. Before we get into that discussion, before we move past taking a pill to enhance your intelligence too far, I did want to drop our first MCLE passphrase into the show. It's going to be blue pill to go ahead and help people demonstrate to any oversight bodies that they may need to that they listen to the show. Some people who tune into the show do so for continuing legal education credit or other professional credit. So we drop these passphrases into the show to help them out if they need to prove that they did listen and learn something, hopefully. If you want more information about that, head on over to wiki.twit.tv, find the Twill page there, and we've got all kinds of info for you on MCLE credit and the show. But let's talk about cars. Let's talk about contextual cars and services that may not be built into your car, such as the one Trapster that you wrote about, Robert, but leverage the fact that you're moving around. Where is all that?
It'll be interesting to see what Trapster does. Trapster was a system like Waze where you could self-report cops and other obstacles on the road as you drove around, and Waze really beat them in the marketplace. So I have a feeling if I was at Nokia, I would be pulling that back and then rethinking what to do with maps, because Nokia owns Navtech and really has a lot of map data that they could use to build a new kind of Siri or something like that. But cars are seeing three changes. One, you're seeing more and more autonomous driving technology into the cars. And I talked with the head of BMW's autonomous driving systems at CES. And he says it's going to be about 15 years before we get a real car that can really drive without a human, mostly because of legal issues. That car has to be proved that it won't hurt people, and that'll take a long time. Even though the technology is pretty close to being done today, it will take that long to drive the number of miles and do the kinds of testing to convince the rest of us that this car won't do something nasty to us. But he said what they are doing, the car companies are investing in this technology because they're going to take some of that autonomous driving technology and make the car park itself and keep inside lanes and see ahead of the traffic so it knows something about what's coming at it, and maybe save your life by augmenting your capabilities while driving, or even taking over during boring stretches of roadway and letting you go to sleep, or do something like text in the car, which is really bad behavior right now. But the car could easily take over on a long drive through Nevada and drive itself. So that's one side of things. They're talking about connected cars right now, and what they really mean by that is they are changing their strategy from thinking that you're going to buy a $6,000 navigation system in the car to understanding that your phone is the center of your world, and you're going to walk into the car and the phone is going to automatically connect to the car, and then the car might even connect to other cars to do things like traffic controls and stuff like that. But right now, most of the cars are just making that sync up to the car easier. And you're seeing products from Apple and Google that will further blur that line between your mobile phone and the systems in the car. So that's one thing. The third thing is the car is being turned into an API itself. In fact, if you have a modern car, you can buy a gadget from a company called Automatic that plugs in underneath the dash and then turns the car into an API. The Tesla is probably the best example of what this API lets you do, because a friend of mine built a Google Glass app to control his dad's Tesla, and he can ask Glass for how much power is left in the car, where is the car parked. He can even ask it to open the moonroof by talking to his Glass, because the car has an API or an application programming interface that you can write iPhone or Android apps to talk to that API and do things with the car, and that's quite an exciting change in cars, which are leading to new capabilities. The Chevy Volt has an iPhone app, for instance, that lets you do all sorts of stuff with the car. So it's quite a fun world, and most people are keying in on the autonomous driving because that's the most fascinating future, and it brings up a whole number of legal issues. There's actually a law class at Stanford about how law will change when there's a robot driving your car, and that can change at a really deep level, because the sensors that are on top of the car can see how many people are in each car. You might not think about that, but our human perception is not good enough in a split second to make a decision of life and death based on how many lives are going to be affected on each outcome. A computer can do that really, really fast. And also the sensors can see things that your eye can't see. They can have an infrared sensor that can see heat signatures coming from the cars. And that brings up a whole fun area of new law, and how our law systems might change if we had a world where cars could really self-drive themselves, and then it leads into who's responsible if the car does kill you or hurt you, or hurt somebody else. And that's a lot of fun. I'm sure you guys could do a couple of shows just on that topic.
I think the biggest issue with that would be the ethics that go into the programming of that. Like that one particular algorithm you were talking about there, measuring how many lives are at stake. I mean, wouldn't it be odd if you could program it so that if it recognizes you have a choice between hitting a car with one person and a car with four people, but you're more likely to die yourself if you hit the car with one person? I mean, how do you, where do the ethics come from in programming that way, and the notions of self-preservation? I mean, will it be incumbent upon the driver to choose the algorithm that would not necessarily be in his or her own self-interest? That's wow.
You know you're not going to get to choose this stuff, right?
Then who does?
First of all, there might be hundreds of algorithms being called on within a few microseconds, right? I talked to Mike Monteler-Merlo, who built the Google car, built the algorithms for the Google car, and we talk about how I asked him, how is this thing going to go through an intersection when 4 autonomous cars meet at the intersection at the same time? And humans are pretty good about that, because we look at each other and go, hey, come on, go.
Yeah.
And we are good at communicating with each other in that kind of situation. And he goes, well, I will just start going randomly, and my car will watch the behaviors of the other cars. And if they all go, I'll wait, and then I'll go at a random time again and try it again. And it's like, wow, how the algorithms work is very interesting, but you're not going to be able to choose one algorithm and say, I want that to be turned on in this situation, because there might be hundreds of algorithms all working at the same time to figure out the best path forward for the car.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All I can say is I'm just so glad that DeepMind can play 8-bit video games, because it's going to need those kinds of skills to make these fine-grained decisions.
Well, remember the Big Blue contest that IBM had where they pitted a computer against a master chess player? Mm-hmm. We're going to have a Big Blue in the next couple of years where a Stanford car is going to race a top human driver, and is going to beat him or her. So you think about, in fact, at BMW at CES this year, had a self-driving car that took journalists out on the racetrack, and the car was able to do things like slide perfectly, because the car the algorithms are so good and the sensors are so good and the computers are so fast that it can do a lot of fun stuff that humans really, really struggle with. Even the top end drivers who spend 20 years learning how to really push their cars to the edge of traction, computers are going to pass that in the next 2 to 5 years, no problem at all. They're already within a second of the top drivers because the computers can push the tires to the edge of traction and be consistent about it. And also the computer can see 360 degrees and can see inputs that we just can't even perceive. Like they know, if you put sensors along the roadway, you know what the wind speed is, what the traction index is based on water on the pavement. In fact, they drove this car through some water and it handled it just fine, sort of like Audi does on ice, right? I drove an Audi on ice at Davos, and they turn on the traction control and it's impossible to spin the car. It really doesn't let you do that. It just slows down the car if you try to do something stupid. You turn it off, you could spin that car in a second, and the computers are already helping us drive, and in 15 years they're really going to take over.
Right. We've talked a lot about this on the show, actually, and also about, not just the legal liability in a case of an accident considerations, but the whole insurance industry and how it's going to develop around things like, well, if you're driving an Audi on ice, you can't skid, and we know that, so we'll price you more attractively. Let's get back to something that Robert mentioned a little while ago about all the data gathering that a contextual car can do, and putting together when you are, at the strip club, or there's a whole profile of your life that could be put together from where you go. And it doesn't just put it together about the adult passengers in the car. It puts it together about every passenger in the car. Larry has written a lot about COPPA, the Child Online Privacy Protection Act. It's obviously something that online companies are having to struggle with already today, without having this kind of information about people. It occurred to me as we're having this conversation, Larry, that COPPA could be on a head-on collision with car companies. I'd never really thought about that before. Had you?
No, I hadn't. And, honestly, the problem, as is that these legal standards just never can keep up with the pace of change of technology. That's, of course, a theme we've talked about many times before. And the only thing that technology is doing, getting faster, and the only thing that legal change is doing is staying at the same pace at best. So, that I think Robert made this point, is that when you have the cars, well, of course, cars are self-driving to a great extent already. And as we say, the technology is really there to do a lot more of that. And it's not really that we have to figure out the legal standards, it's that the law has to catch up. And that's something that makes lawmakers uncomfortable. It makes the people who are already regulated, the car makers, the insurance companies, makes them very uncomfortable. And a lot of the delay is really for them to catch up emotionally, rather than sort of to work out new standards. That working out the new standards is not the hard part. So yeah, things like COPPA, if you went and said that to the Federal Trade Commission and said, okay, what happens when the car knows everything that's going on it, including about the kids, they would just give you a blank look and ask you to go away.
Well, hopefully that blank look won't ask for long. What do you think about this, Evan?
It's tricky because we have a hard enough time dealing with the concerns of grown-ups here, and it's just another perfect example of how are we going to figure out how to implement the standards that we already have, the sensibilities that we already have. I would tack on to what Larry said. We already know the appropriate legal standards, and we can look back, the development of the common law for hundreds of years to get the sort of the what are now the hardwired notions of what's right and how liability should be allocated and responsibility, rights, obligations, all that stuff. But this is just one example. This is the 999th example we've had where just the broader amount of choice, the greater amount of choices that we have to conduct ourselves, occasioned by technology, challenges us to figure out how to take those things that are hardwired and execute it into the present environment. So, and it gets especially tricky in such a lightning rod when we're dealing with kids, especially for like this COPPA thing.
Right. So one way that the freaky line gets to be less of a concern for people is when they give meaningful consent and they have a good idea of how their data and their children's data is going to be used. Robert, before the show started, you started telling us an anecdote about when you were at Microsoft and spent some time with a member of the legal team there. As we're talking through all this, it seems to me like the purchases of many of our consumer goods now, I mean, not just the car, but maybe the refrigerator and other things that can be gathering personal data about you, are going to have to be accompanied by some disclosures along these lines, and that the customer is actually going to have to give some consent.
Well, I spoke at a privacy conference a couple months ago, and one of the sessions was what sign do they put on front of a smart store that warns you that you're being surveilled in that store? You know, I've seen 3D sensors from a company called Shop Perception that watch your behavior as you go through stores. There's a company called Shelfbox that actually you tap into a display and it tells you stuff about that display. So if you're in the cookie aisle, it knows you're standing right there. And on and on. At South by Southwest, I went to a Bluetooth meetup, and one of the guys had made a mat for the front of the meetup that watches your behavior going over the mat. And our iPhones now have a thing called Bluetooth smart beacons, or Apple calls them iBeacons, that are pinging a number into the air if it's turned on. And right now it's not, but it will be soon. Somebody will turn it on, I'm sure. And then all of a sudden, devices around you know precisely where you are. And also that ping could be hooked up to Facebook, for instance. And all of a sudden I know who's standing with me. And that's a whole new era of surveillance that we haven't really thought through, and is way over the freaky line. But baseball stadiums are going to have 65 of these little radios starting at opening day. So you're going to walk in with your iPhone or your Android phone, and if you have the Major League Baseball app, it's going to change as you walk around. Sort of Apple stores already do this with the iPhone, with the Apple Store app, right?
And there's like a plausible pathway to this idea where you could, I'm thinking of the way this would interface with glass in a really cool or uncanny way, perhaps, where you talk about you're just walking in the concourse at the baseball stadium and you see somebody's name pop up. What you've articulated there seems like how that could actually happen, right? Yeah, and contextual information about them. Moreover,
it's not just
likes and dislikes.
Yeah, it's not just who you're with. It's are you next to a famous landmark, or are you next to the hot dog stand? That stand now can know you're there and can show you stuff. Hey,
and it
you get
be
10
more
loyalty points. If you buy a hot dog right now, or do you want your hot dog delivered to your seat? we can make that happen too, because we know where you sit.
Right.
And it would be more relevant to market mustard, for example, than it would a car at that point.
By the way, sports is about to really change because of some of these sensors. I saw a little sensor pack that the football players are going to wear that streams off of them in real time, their heart rate, the speed that they're running, even the intensity of hits. And that data can be put onto TV or onto something like a Google Glass if you're staring at the field, and you can watch your favorite player's stats and know what his top time is in running. So you can start playing all sorts of new games based on the sensor data that's streaming off your favorite sports people.
I would be so reluctant to do that if I were an athlete, though, because there's, in physical sports, there's the corollary or the analog or whatever, the corresponding thing to the poker face. You may be really hurting, and your heart may really be high, but you don't want your opponent to know that. That seems like you could get an awful lot of resistance there.
But you're not
coaches will hate that.
Well, no, from what I hear, the coaches actually really like this stuff because they can push their players to the edge of human performance and then back off. And they can also track things like concussions at a whole new level because you can really see a lot more data about how hard somebody was hit and whether they were hit in a dangerous way. And also these sensors now, other sensors that the football players are wearing show whether they're getting enough sleep at night and for their ultimate performance. You know, if you change somebody's at that level, a performance of let's say an Olympic athlete by 1%, that's the difference between 50th place and gold medal, right? I mean, that's a huge, huge shift. So they're looking for any edge they can to push themselves and their teams to the edge so that they can get the utmost out of that human investment.
Right. I meant that coaches would hate it if the opposing coach could know everything about what's going on with their own team.
But you know everything. You know, it's mutually assured destruction because you're going to have all the data on the opposing team as well. So you're going to know. You're going to know everything that people are watching at home. You know.
Coming back to this consent issue, I can't imagine the consents and the waivers that the athletes would have to sign to give up their, you know, as someone in IRC is pointing out, their HIPAA-protected medical information for public consumption is a pretty serious thing. And Larry, I'm curious what you think, since you have your finger so on the pulse of, not to make a medical information joke, of Washington and policy, how you think that meaningful consent is going to play out with the various things that we've been discussing. Obviously, our means for getting meaningful consent to data gathering on the web is less than perfect. People get presented with boilerplate agreements. They click or perhaps don't click that they've accepted the terms, and then people can fight about, you know, what sort of consent has been given. When we're talking about things like cars or other devices that, you know, traditionally have not gathered data about us, how do you think that Washington's going to deal with this?
Badly. That's the short answer. You know, I think in the sort of last 5 or 6 years I've been spending a lot of time in Washington, the privacy is just the perennial topic that comes up. We have lots of bills that float around. Usually, unfortunately, they just arise when there's a catastrophe or some crisis. And then, you know, Congress runs into, you know, gets into gear and something gets put in. Oh, we've got to stop super cookies. Oh, you know, we've got to stop, you know, Apple collecting data on the phone when you're not looking, and all these sort of mini panics that come up. There's never really been any serious effort to do anything comprehensive about disclosure, about consent, about, you know, what is actually private and what's protected and what's not. It's probably a good thing. I think, you know, like all kind of forms of contract law, privacy consents or any other kind of consent, most of the time the actual document itself is irrelevant, right? It only really matters when something goes wrong or where there's sort of something at the margins that's really problematic, that you actually even would look at the document or look to see what was agreed in the first place. I think that's probably, you know, that's the best solution anyway, is just to imagine that by and large, again, the companies don't want unhappy customers. Customers are increasingly able to leverage social media to make their displeasure known and get responses in a very, you know, almost sort of, you know, pitchforks and torches at the castle kind of way. Whether that's the best way to do it, it's much more effective than waiting for Congress or waiting for states to, you know, or even for the Federal Trade Commission, which has authority here, to spend 2 or 3 years investigating something, you know, coming out with a kind of a compromise, trying to split the baby, trying to figure out a remedy. And of course, by that point, the technology's become obsolete. We've moved on to something else. So if we're really going to get a better form of consent or a better form of notice, it's really going to come in the interactions between consumers and companies. It's not going to come from policy.
Well, we were talking about Gmail a while ago and how the freaky line for most people and Gmail has moved over time. That at first, you know, when you were presented with the notion that something would be algorithmically reading your mail and presenting you with ads based on what's in there, that that could be, a freaky thing. Certainly Microsoft hit on that and did its Scroogled campaign, touting the fact that Outlook didn't do such things. Some people, though, have not come to terms with that being okay, and Gmail-related lawsuits are out there. A couple of them are in the news this week. There was an attempt to consolidate these suits together into a class action, and that was not successful because of this issue of consent. The court found that that's going to be too particular to every individual plaintiff, whether or not they gave consent to what was going on. But the two groups of people who are involved in these lawsuits suing Google are students using the Google for Education tools, which I think is pretty interesting. Having had direct experience with that, my son was at a school that was using Gmail, et cetera. And, me being me, a whole bunch of things went off in my head as we went through that process. First being, I was never asked to give consent to his use of the service. He's under the age of 13, and there seems to be some kind of COPPA exception for this. Some students have hit on some of these issues and are actually suing Google over these consent issues. Also, there are individuals who are not Gmail subscribers who are upset about the fact that though they may be protecting their privacy, they think, by not using the service, profiles are being, so they allege, prepared about them based on their correspondence with Gmail users. So, Robert, do you think it's kind of interesting that several years down the road into using Gmail, it seems that Google hasn't ironed all this out?
No, and it's getting worse because they're doing things like Google Now, which is looking inside your email for context, and so are other people. I use this calendar app called Tempo, which I give it access to my calendar and my email, and it looks for context based on what I put on my calendar, for instance. And we're just at the beginning of this stuff. We're soon going to see systems that really understand everything we put into the computer and help us live our lives. But some of that data could be used against us, particularly if our governments go off the rails, which they do once in a while, or our employers go off the rails, which they do once in a while. This Google Glass has an eye sensor. It knows whether I'm sober or drunk, right? Does my insurance company get to see that data? It could. It doesn't yet, but it could. Does my employer get that data? Does my wife get that data? And on and on.
You're raising a point right there that I've thought about in, sort of the earlier days of social media, and I brought it up on the show before, so listeners will have heard me talk about this before. It's the idea of social media, or now expanding out into these more connected technologies, context providing technologies. I mean, could this actually serve to be an integrity enhancer? Like the traditional example is the photo of yourself doing a keg stand. There are actually two decision points there. One was, whether to post the photo of yourself doing a keg stand or what have you, or having somebody posting a photo of someone else. But then there was the earlier decision point of whether to do the keg stand in the first place. Most people focus on the second decision point, forsaking the first one. If we know that we're being watched and everything, are we just going to be better humans, more moral, more kind to one another?
No.
Is it like Kant's categorical imperative wired into the technology now?
No, I've had this actually happen to me, and I didn't shoot the pictures, but I got drunk at a London party and had a bit of fun. But in 2009, Michael Arrington, who started TechCrunch, said, "My God, Scoble, did you think we wouldn't see these?" And something very specific happened because of that. I didn't get fired because I worked for a cool company, but I got invited to a whole new class of parties. I've had CEOs walk up to me in the streets and say, "I'm inviting you, to my party on Friday night because of those pictures." And I'm like, "Wow, that's a whole new shift in how we deal with each other, isn't it?"
Well, were you working for Microsoft at the time?
No, I was at Rackspace. I've been at Rackspace for 5 years now. So
right. Well, you were telling us before the show, as we talk about Gmail and Outlook and the Scroogled campaign, that Microsoft is sort of in an ironic situation about its own email policies at the moment.
Yeah, it's so Microsoft looked inside a former employee's Hotmail account to prove that he had stolen Windows source code or intellectual property from Microsoft and given it to a blogger, which they're now charging him with a felony for stealing intellectual property. It's partly based on going into his email account.
Right. So Microsoft now is saying that it's going to add its own internal searches to its transparency reports so that you can see when Microsoft is looking at your email and, to what extent the government has asked to. Do you have any take on this, Larry?
I didn't see this story yet, but obviously, as I'm sure we've talked about many times before, the legal standard between what the government gets to do, or at least theoretically what the government gets to do, and what private actors, including individuals and companies, get to do is very different. That's very different for an important reason, which is the Fourth Amendment concern. When the government is spying on you, they have armies, they have weapons. The rest of us, in theory, don't have those two things. So it's probably, not as surprising as it sounds, but it's probably also not a legal issue.
Well, one thing that's been an ongoing legal issue and a PR issue for technology companies, since we're talking about government surveillance as well, is the extent to which the tech companies have known about PRISM and the other data gathering programs that we know about through the Snowden leaks. This week, we have word from NSA General Counsel Rajesh D, if I'm saying his last name right, who's said unequivocally that all of the data gathering was done with full knowledge of the tech companies. Larry Page, talking up at TED, once again confirmed, as the other tech companies have all along, that they've known nothing about it. He, was complaining at TED, I don't think we can have a democracy if we have to protect you and your users from stuff we've never had a conversation about. So, Larry, where do you think the truth is here?
Oh, God. I don't know. And I don't know that we'll ever really know what's going on. I think the NSA still denies that the PRISM ever went into effect. Or even, I don't even know that they've acknowledged it's anything more than a PowerPoint presentation that was leaked to the Washington Post through the Snowden stuff. So we don't know. We do know about, we know that things do go through the FISA courts. We don't know exactly what they are, though they've been giving us a little bit more information about that. We know about the collection of phone records, of the so-called metadata. They've acknowledged that. But most of the kind of more extreme stuff in terms of web surfing and other data gathering, they're still, categorically denying that it was ever done. And I'm not sure what's going to take. The last time I was on, we were talking about that blue ribbon commission that the White House put together to make recommendations. The government is now apparently today meeting again with some very senior tech CEOs, including Mark Zuckerberg, who's been fairly outspoken about this and the damage that it's doing to U.S. interests as well as sort of internet interests more generally. Will we actually get any real information about this, and will it become more transparent? Will we get better oversight? I didn't, hear a whole lot of that in Washington the last several months. I think they just want the story to go away, but I don't think anybody, either Republicans or Democrats, is really quite eager to take it on.
Do you have an opinion, Robert, whether the tech companies know or didn't know?
We at Rackspace, we don't cooperate except when we get a very specific request, and even then we try to push back. I believe that they largely didn't know, other than the official FISA requests. They did know about those. They might not know why they needed that data, but when when a court comes to you and says, "Here's a subpoena for very specific stuff," what are you going to do? You have to turn it over. Otherwise, they come after you legally, right? But you can tap fiber lines between data centers, and data centers, if you know anything about how data centers work, you need to pass data to other data centers to, one, make sure it's duplicated in another place so that if a plane crashes into that data center, it's backed up. You want to do that also to get closer to the edge. So a user in India has the same experience with your website that I do here in Silicon Valley. And so there's a lot of data duplication between data centers, and you can easily tap into fiber lines without anybody knowing and pull all that data out. So it's a tough thing, and you're now seeing these companies really upping their encryption so that if somebody's in between these data centers, it's a lot harder to get any useful pattern recognition out of that. It's an interesting problem, but I believe them for the most part that they didn't know, other than the official FISA court request. They certainly did know about those.
All right. Before we shift gears away from privacy and the freaky line and to talking more about disruption, just wanted to pick your brains to see if anybody thinks that it matters that Twitter is no longer going to encrypt direct messages. My take is that if you are trying to have confidential conversations with somebody in an online way, that a Twitter DM is probably not your go-to thing anyway.
You should learn about Tor Chat or Silent Circle, both of which fully encrypt your conversations. I mean, and even then, I go back to, don't put anything in the computer that you don't want on the front page of the New York Times. You know, it's too risky, even with Tor Chat. But Tor Chat's fun for it's very useful for doing work that you don't want governments or other companies to be able to look into easily.
Half the time when I think I'm doing a direct message, I wind up doing a tweet anyway. So I still don't quite get the protocol.
That's what I was thinking.
That's if you live in all public life or mostly public life, it makes it really easy because you don't have to think, did I have the right privacy turn on this message, or right. Should I take this in a Snapchat where the message disappears after a few seconds, or if you let it all hang out, then it's easier to live life. But I understand why most people don't like to live the kind of life I've chosen.
Yeah, you've done that for quite some time, Robert, and you really are the canary in the coal mine for the rest of us who are trying to decide, how much is appropriate to make public, and may have other family members who have different opinions on the topic
and
too.
Keep in mind, I talked with Mark Andreessen about this, and he's noticing that humans will change the taboos. Look at how gay marriage is opening up around the world, and smoking marijuana is, or using marijuana is opening up around the world. Those are 20 years ago, those were very, very taboo things, and now they're becoming almost normalized to the place where it's now legal in 2 or 3 states to smoke a joint. Right. I think that's the real answer. You have to change the law to support what we really want to do.
Every now and then, even you run into something that you think is giving people too much transparency into your life. That's why you wrote about Trapster. That when someone could call you up and say, "Hey, did you just make a U-turn?" That was a little too much.
Yeah. You start looking at risks of this stuff being used against you, and there's risks not just from governments going off the rails or companies trying to fire you because you have a pre-existing condition that they learned about or something like that. We have stalkers in our society. We have people who really don't treat other people well. We call them criminals, and it's something you have to worry about, because with these new phones, I can build systems that really share my location and my context, and maybe even what meeting I'm heading to, right? So we do have to think about the consequences of openly sharing too much to too many people. And Trapster is still I think, over that freaky line for me, where Trapster shows a blue line where you've driven, and it was designed to try to show people that somebody had just driven that street right ahead of you, so that you knew if there was cops there or something, or that the data was fresh. So it's a good goal that they had, but they did it in a very bad way. Waze decided to do it in a completely different way, and they don't show a blue line, but you can see the freshness of the reports as they're made. And yeah, they should have gone the Waze route. I think Waze chose a much better way to do it.
Do you ever have family discord on the issue with your older kids or your wife?
My kids are seeping in this world, and yeah, we do. I wish my son would actually share more of his experience in school and to share what he's learning. And he knows that there's such a deep social cost to anything you do, and he just doesn't want to think about that right now. He had trouble with people stealing a friend's phone, and it was a girl that stole his friend's phone. And the girl started texting my son and impersonating the guy, and asking very personal questions about her. And that got him into trouble. So kids really learn in a deeper way than adults do, that there's a whole raft of social costs to this new world. And they learn very quickly how to deal with it and how to stay offline. I think this is why Snapchat was so popular with high school kids, where in my world, it really isn't popular at all yet. I can see some reasons for it, but I don't use it. And most of the people in my world don't use it. But the kids all use it because they know that there's a real deep social cost to even liking somebody's post. If you like the wrong girl's post, all of a sudden all the other girls are bitching at you because, why do you like her post? You don't like my post, and that kind of behavior. And that happens in a very deep way in high school, and we all remember that kind of drama between cliques and between friends in high school that generally doesn't happen anymore in the adult world. And also, we have a real incentive to share our lives in the adult world. We get jobs that way, we make friends that way, and on and on. We get on shows that way. So.
Right. I wonder if this is generational, and that we may be more prone to doing it as adults than maybe our kids are.
Well, no, the kids are doing it at a higher rate. It's fun showing people Google Glass. I've shown probably 800 people Google Glass, and when kids get the glass, they really talk about it differently than older people. One 14-year-old I met at a Mets game said, "This is my future," and no older person said that, And so there is a generational approach. Also, the guy who makes my shirts, Scott Jordan, makes a pocket that's transmission proof, a pouch. And I was talking about this at the New York Maker Faire, and a kid in the front row said, "I already made my own." And I haven't seen any adult make their own transmission-proof pouch. So the kids are already hacking this always surveilled world and are trying to figure out how to control it and control the consequences of it. And I find that to be very fascinating and very positive.
I think you're right. Let's go on and talk about some businesses that are ripe for disruption, are being disrupted, in keeping with what Larry's been paying attention to and writing about. Just about all of the ones that I flagged for this week are in the entertainment arena. So we've seen now 7 years down the road from the filing of Viacom's billion-dollar lawsuit against Google for YouTube's supposed violation of copyright laws and liability for the infringements of its users, so Viacom asserted, has now been settled. And so it reminded me of The Wasteland, not with a bang, but a whimper. The case goes out millions of dollars down the road, lots of legal resources expended on something that the parties have now resolved before it would have reached another conclusion in the Second Circuit Court of Appeal. Larry, did this come as a surprise to you at all?
No. This case had kind of worn out its welcome a long time ago, and it was clear just on the procedure, they're still on the procedural level of things, Viacom was not getting what it wanted, and it was always going to be a very difficult case to win because essentially, Viacom could have always gone after the individual infringers who were putting up unlicensed content on YouTube. Of course, that was a pointless effort. They knew. We all know that. And so they were going after YouTube itself, or eventually Google after the acquisition, to try and see if they could prove that the company had some liability for either knowing or at least not looking close enough to what people were doing that they could attach liability to them. So on the one hand, you could say, well, this was a complete failure on the part of Viacom. They didn't get anything, at least, of course, the terms are not being made public, but there was at least one report that said no money was changing hands in the settlement. It was just going to go away. But that's only if you think about litigation as being about the litigation, and it's not. In this case, certainly, it was more about trying to use yet another lever to kind of change the power dynamic between the content providers on the one hand and the internet service companies on the other hand. And in that sense, you could say, well, Viacom won quite a bit. Both YouTube and other video sites have changed their practices pretty dramatically, even though no court of law said they had to, or they would be liable if they didn't. In fact, in YouTube, they've enhanced this content ID software, these bots that go around looking for copyrighted material and automatically taking it down, so much so that there was a story last month that somebody would put up a clip of gameplay from Grand Theft Auto 5, had it taken down, and then when they sort of investigated, it turned out the reason was that there was a long period of time where there was a siren going, and somehow the Content ID bot misunderstood that siren to be a famous jazz quartet and had taken it down as a copyright violation of the jazz recording that, of course, wasn't there. So in some ways, we've pushed this way over the maybe too far in that case over the line to protect them.
That would be just a case in point for your book, right? That YouTube is out there disrupting Hollywood, but now that it has made these accommodations, maybe it is ripe for disruption itself to a content ID system that works better and is less friction-filled.
Yeah, obviously, the great thing about the kind of disruption that we have been studying in our research and in the book is, you become an incumbent really fast. One day you're the underdog startup that everybody loves, and your customers give you a lot of leeway if things break down. They're going to support you if people are going to go after you legally, whether you're Uber or whether you're YouTube. The next day, you're the incumbent yourself, and you may be ripe for being disrupted by somebody else if you've gotten in sort of too much accommodation to all those other people that were trying to slow you down or change the trajectory of what you were doing.
What do you think, Evan? Are the legal waters just too fraught with danger for someone to come in and try to return YouTube to a more wide open, wild, wild west sort of arrangement where you're not going to have these false positives like the jazz track siren?
Yeah, that's an interesting story, isn't it? That false positive from, was it Grand Theft Auto? Well, first of all, I think you're the T.S. Eliot scholar among us here, but I think it was the Hollow Men, right? And not the Wasteland that talked about.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
But,
it's been a while since I've read my Eliot.
Right. But we don't have to trouble ourselves with that. So, well, let me start with this. I mean, the whole Google or YouTube Viacom dispute was, a dispute. I guess the best metaphor is like it was a dispute trapped in amber. We can go back and just see something, a dispute arising from facts frozen in time in 2005, 2007, that era here. So, with Content ID and those mechanisms by which things can be more smoothly monetized, that seems to be, the way things that have gone like in that direction it's away from opening it up to the wild, wild west, like you were, setting up with your question there. It wouldn't seem to make a whole lot of sense if there actually is some monetization to be done from the platform this way, because how else would YouTube have enjoyed so much success? I'm not missing something, am I? But I mean, it's made a lot of money from those sorts of arrangements, much more, I'm sure, than just having an advertising-based model where everything is open, the content is open. There's no real monitoring, no real attention paid to the type of content is there. So, it might satisfy our more libertarian sensibilities about wanting systems to be open and not having a bunch of regulation, whether it be the business regulating it or the government regulating it or what have you. But it just seems like from a real standpoint of looking to make these things profitable, monetizable, extracting the value from them that way, there's got to be some sort of collaboration here between the content industry and the platform to make it actually turn into something. It's the same shift we saw from the world pre-iTunes. Music was, the distribution systems for music was wide open. The peer-to-peer networks, a la Napster, Kazaa, Grokster, those early days, think there was a big fundamental shift there where there was an effective monetization. I know it's a little bit different, but it seems to me like it's the same principle.
And, Evan hits on a really important point here is we don't know what would YouTube look like, and what would some of the other services that didn't make it, and largely because of litigation, what would they look like now if this lawsuit and similar lawsuits hadn't been brought? Of course, this is a question we can never answer. And it seems to be the model that, when you have disruptive innovation, obviously if YouTube in its very early days had gone to Viacom and said, license your content to us, or set up this kind of advertising network sharing formula where you'll get to benefit when people put your stuff up, and because we'll show the ads, or we'll put in content. Even if they had done that in the very early days, we know that the content industry is fearful of anything new, and certainly things that they didn't control would have said absolutely not. So, what do the innovators do? They put the stuff out there and they wait and see. They get, critical mass, they get momentum, they get the litigation, and then the litigation in some ways is what brings, as Evan says, the parties together to the table to figure out, all right, how is this really going to work? We know it can't work with you not participating. We know it can't work with you suing us for to try and block us altogether from existing. So now let's figure out what it is. We talked about that in the book. We said, one of the things incumbents can do when they're up against a disruptor that's coming on too fast for them to respond to is to use the courts, use litigation, use things like patent and copyright in particular to create what we called bullet time, which is, from the movie The Matrix, when you have the ability to just slow down time for a little while so you can get out of the way of a bullet.
Okay, that has to be our second MCLE passphrase for the show. Since we did Blue Pill, our second one is now bullet time. Thank you for that, Larry.
Sure.
So how about poor Michael Robertson? It seems like the timing on this is incredibly ironic, given that YouTube and Google have now finally gotten Viacom off their back and have, seemingly come out on top in this dispute. Michael Robertson, the founder of MP3 Tunes and before that MP3.com, came out on the other side of the analysis, and the court there determined in a trial against him that there were red flags that he should have been aware of, and that he was willfully blind to the infringement of the users, and that there should be liability, at least for MP3 Tunes. Who knows? I'm not quite sure to what extent anybody's pursuing him personally.
Well, that was the point. They were pursuing him personally because the company, was out.
Is bankrupt.
Didn't have any assets. What's interesting about this one is it's a jury trial. This was a finding by a jury. We don't often get that far along in this kind of litigation where we actually have a jury making a determination. We're now going to get to the damages stage of things, and they're fighting about what sort of evidence can come in terms of mitigation. That in some ways he's trying to relitigate the case. But it's always dangerous. Evan will tell you as well. It's always dangerous to put anything before a jury because they can do anything, and you never can really predict.
Right. So he'll have the appellate process to go through, and hopefully some distancing of himself personally from what his company may have been up to. But that just came down this week, too, that the litigation against him that's been going on in New York concluded not in his favor. Popcorn Time, we've been talking about it on at least the last show, maybe the last couple of shows. It was shut down and put up a message as to how it had checked with its lawyers 4 times, it put in bold, and is convinced of
Two of
its
those
legality.
were voicemails. Yeah.
Right. I don't know. Do you think that they spent any time bunking with the lawyers, Robert? Maybe not, or they would have gotten it right.
No. The fun story I told before the show started was I back at Microsoft, I did a lot of videos with this $200 camcorder, and it turned out I disclosed some information that I had no idea was not protected by patents. And they said you need to be trained to identify legal issues that are going to get you in trouble, since you're going to be a highly visible person out on the internet on behalf of Microsoft. And they made me bunk with a lawyer for a weekend at a conference. And that was really interesting, because we went through all these areas where corporations can get into trouble by not knowing the law very well. And it's patent time schedules is one of those, where in the United States, the patent starts, when you disclose it. Well, overseas, that's not how it works. If you disclose it, it actually screws up the timetables, and can maybe even reduce your ability to patent an idea. So they were not too happy with me at that day.
Well, I think the takeaway from this Popcorn Time story is though, we saw the Popcorn Time app go offline with the protest station that we still think it's legal. But that doesn't mean that you can't still do exactly what Popcorn Time does. I think there was a good piece in TechCrunch that teed it up nicely. Let me read you that text. Scrolling down, ads loading.
Pretty much that Popcorn Time is awesome, easy to use, slick, all that stuff, right?
Well, no, but, hard to stop, I think was the point. Imagine for a moment if Napster were cloned hundreds of times, if there were a Napster Stanford, a Napster MIT, a Napster four-year high school, completely independent from, yet just as powerful as the original. Imagine what would happen if Sean Fanning and Sean Parker had released the source code, allowing any developer to essentially copy and build on that software. Imagine if Napster were open source. The RIA would have fought a war on 1,000 fronts and lost. So even though, this particular node has been shut down, I don't think that the Popcorn Time problem is going to go away. The problem of having a much more user-friendly way of doing torrents. Do you, Larry?
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, this is an arms race, as it was in music and as it was in before that with, text, newspapers and magazines and so on. The technology is always going to keep finding ways of breaking what it sees as unduly closed systems. And I think the TechCrunch story you're referring to goes into this in some pretty good detail and explains, what consumers and through these kind of proxy technologies are really struggling with is still a pretty strong business model among the major studios to control the timing of releases of their products after they've had their initial showing in the movie theaters. They're still they limit, for example, when it goes on Netflix and on what terms it goes on Netflix and other kinds of streaming sites, because they're still in that very traditional. Disney, of course, classically had this model of the vault, where once the movie was shown, you put it away for 10 years and then try to re-release it as if it was brand new. That's, of course, their prerogative to say, we think that's the best way to maximize our revenue. But consumers are rebelling against that, and they're using technologies like this, even when, we shut one down legally, another one pops up. The question really is, how are we going to reach some accommodation between the copyright holders who have, rights here and justifiably so, and consumers who are saying, we want a different model. We don't want to wait. We don't believe in kind of artificial scarcity and vaults. We want to see stuff when we see it. We're willing to work with you on a payment model, but you have to work with us on a timing model. And so far, they have not all come to the table. But every time we get, yet another of these technologies that are even harder to stop legally, it kind of, I think, pushes the content industries closer to saying, all right, we're going to have to accommodate this in some way, even if we could stop it.
All right, well, let us end the show going back to some transportation-related issues. These have a law and policy gloss on them this week.
It's the kind of music you'd hear in a taxi.
Or in a siren in Grand Theft Auto. So, ironically enough, Seattle, the hub of things innovative and cool and technology-oriented and disruptive, has decided to crack down on services like Lyft and Uber. Can you tell us about that, Larry?
Sure. So again, I'm sure we talked about it before, but this idea is that we have now industry that's been highly regulated for decades in different ways in different cities in different states. And in some ways, the industries have kind of taken over the regulation, and it turned regulations that maybe started out as trying to protect consumers from dangerous drivers or underinsured drivers or too much traffic if we had too many taxis on the road. These kinds of consumer protection concerns have really now turned into barriers to entry that protect the existing license holders or medallion holders from having to compete with more of the same or even different kinds of services. And the problem that happens is when you kind of get those kind of barriers to entry, you as the incumbent have no incentive to innovate. And if I literally, last time I went to Los Angeles a few weeks ago, just as an experiment, I took a licensed taxi on the way out of the airport to downtown, and I took UberX on the way back from the airport, back from downtown to the airport. The taxi cab driver at the airport didn't know where Figueroa Street was, sort of the main street of downtown Los Angeles. He was a terrible driver. He was noisy. The cab was dirty. It smelled bad, and it cost me, $50-some. UberX driver, showed up within a minute of my using the smartphone app to get him, got me to the airport in record time, and it was about half the price and a much more pleasant experience. And you really see how in that example, regulation can get in the way of having any incentive to innovate. So in the Seattle case, the city council has said there's too many of these new drivers on the road. The city apparently hasn't issued any new medallions for many years. The question then becomes, well, why haven't they issued new medallions? It's because the city fathers, in all their wisdom and with great study and care and lots of data analysis, have figured out the traffic patterns and decided that, in fact, there are precisely the right number of taxi cabs in Seattle now, and any more would leave too many of them running empty and clogging up the roads. Or is it because they're beholden to the existing taxi cab and limousine and paratransit association, the other trade groups, saying, we don't want to compete with these people, and we bought these medallions on the understanding we wouldn't have to compete with each other or with any new entrants. That's the struggle, I think, and one of the reasons that consumers have become so active and kind of becoming lobbyists for startups on their behalf, kind of unpaid lobbyists, is the consumers are saying, we don't think you're really looking out for our best interests anymore. We certainly don't think you've analyzed the data in a way that says that it's a bad thing for traffic or wasting gas or pollution or any other good reason to keep these services limited. We think you're doing it because you were asked to by the existing incumbents.
So do you want to try and gaze into your crystal ball and let us know, do you think this is just an exception and that Lyft and Uber and other similar services are going to have more free reign elsewhere, or is Seattle a harbinger of things to come?
No, I think what we saw in our research was better and cheaper always beats worse and more expensive. It may take time. It may take, it may take more lobbying. It may take, sort of more consumer activism. It may take a lot of odd things, but the fact of the matter is, if you've got the better innovation and it's cheaper than what the incumbents are doing and they refuse to respond competitively, they're only going to respond legally, that's a strategy that never works for very long, if it works at all.
All right, well, maybe the same principle applies to this next story about the Washington Nationals who used a small drone to capture publicity photos during their spring training. They did not have federal approval for that. And as of right now, commercial use of drones in the United States is against FAA laws. It seems like we're going to see a lot of people tripping up on that as drones become more and more popular. And of course, we've had the funny stories on the show before about delivering beer to ice fishermen and delivering tacos. And, there's clearly a desire to be using these things in a more widespread way. And here all the Nationals wanted to do was take pictures. But, I don't think anybody would argue with the fact that this is a commercial use. It's just that you might have trouble getting your head around the fact that this should be a prohibited use. What do you think, Larry?
So this has been a problem. There was another decision last week as well, where the FAA, at least an administrative law judge, said the FAA didn't have any authority whatsoever over a different kind of drone being used for a non-commercial purpose. Again, this is a problem we started talking about, which was that the technology gets ahead of law, and it as we get sort of faster and cheaper, more powerful processors and all the other stuff, and we can start shoving sensors into everything basically for free and figuring out what to do with it later. This sort of accelerating pace of innovation compared to the same pace, we'll be generous here, of legal change just is going to lead to more and more of these what I often refer to as collisions at the accident-prone intersection of innovation and law. The FAA is supposed to, in fact, they were ordered by the Congress to come up with rules for how private personal uses of drones, non-military drones, whether commercial or otherwise, could operate at whatever, low altitudes that they were going to do. The FAA has been in this process now for over a year. It's probably a few more years away before they actually get final rules, and then those rules have to get, enrolled. They have to get challenged legally and all the other stuff. The world of technology is not going to wait for that. This is going to, sort of break through. It may be that, this one case will turn out to be the beginning of a legal argument that says the FAA doesn't have any authority here anyway, and we can do whatever the hell we want without waiting for these rules. Or it may just be that, the reality is going to overcome the law, as we've seen in so many other places. It's sort of like if you put a speed limit of 10 miles an hour on the freeway, you can pull over anybody you want and give them a ticket, but the reality is everybody's going to do it anyway. Everybody's going to go the correct speed, the appropriate speed. The law against them, because it's so difficult to enforce, or at least enforce in a big way, isn't really going to provide much of a disincentive.
So, Robert, in addition to taking pills to make us smarter, do you see a lot of businesses out there who want to leverage drones in some way?
Absolutely. There's a whole community here in Silicon Valley that meets every weekend and tests out new drones and flies new drones. And then there's new drone companies popping up that do various things. I think one of my friends is going to actually bring his drone to Sun Valley, so we're going to play around with flying it over us as we're skiing around. I see a real problem though, because these things, if they're flown improperly, they can fly into flight paths of airlines, and a little drone could really do damage to our airlines. You saw the guy who landed in the Hudson. He had 2 engines taken out by flying birds, Mm-hmm. And so the FAA does have a legitimate claim here, which is we need to control what goes up into the airspace, because there's deep consequences to letting people do whatever they want up in that airspace, right? But people are going to do it anyways because these things are so cheap. I have a drone that costs $200, $300.
Right. Evan, any final droney thoughts?
No, I mean, this is it. I just see a comparison between what we were talking about with self-driving cars taking so long to figure out how we're going to regulate this, which is frustrating. But at the same time, there are real interests, human public safety interests at stake in all this. So though it's frustrating to take a long time to regulate this, the stakes are pretty high.
Yeah.
And also, just to bring it back to where we started, of course, one of the things that the drone technology raises that other disruptors don't is there's a lot of privacy craziness that goes with it as well. So that goes into the mix and changes the way in which it's going to roll out and maybe the speed or the trajectory as well.
Yeah, and that brings up, in journalism school, we really studied journalism law a lot. And knowing, the rules in the street are very clear. You can shoot anything pretty much. But if you have to take steps to get off the street to get a better view over somebody's fence, then it starts getting really gray. And in fact, I believe that really does violate somebody's expectation of privacy. If you have to, use a ladder to get a better view of somebody's backyard or something like that. And using a drone is, I'm sorry, I live in a place where I have an expectation of privacy that does not include you flying something, up to my window.
Right.
So we're going to see this new kind of friction where people really don't understand the law and have these $200 drones. In fact, I saw some at CES that are less than $100, and you can put a little GoPro camera on them, and all of a sudden you're streaming live high def HD video and infringing on people's rights. And that's going to be an interesting problem for the law to figure out and to communicate to people that it's not appropriate.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the GoPro marriage with the drone. Certainly, as someone, it sounds like you're going to go skiing when you're in Idaho, Robert. Certainly nicer to have that thing hovering next to you than maybe plopped on your chest or your helmet. So I could see why people would want to go that direction, but I certainly also wouldn't want to smack into it while I was skiing.
A drone that follows you down the run, that would be neat.
Right.
Or accompanies you down there. That'd be pretty awesome.
It would be, but then, how do you ski? All the drones. Now you have to watch out for snowboarders and drones.
Yeah.
So.
Well, of course, with the sensors and guidance technology, it'll suggest a route. If you're wearing glass, it'll show you a dotted line where you need to go down the run.
Right. And what was it? Trapster? That'll show you, whether you made a turn at the bottom. All right. Let us get on to our tips and resources of the week. Our tips are both little nuggets that I discovered online from Robert. One was an interview that you gave Robert with, let me find it here. I already pulled it up. There it is.
IT business.
Yeah, that's it. IT business, social media tips. And the one that I, obviously, Robert is the king, the Uber of social media. And so when he's giving social media tips, you want to listen. This interview was with Brian Jackson in February, not too long ago. And the tip that I thought was most compelling here, Robert, that you gave, talking about companies and how Brian asked you about it's so hard for some companies. Someone like Verizon would come to mind, or AT&T. When they try and have a social media presence, all they get is negative vitriol from their customers. And your point there was, you've got to deal with it head on. You've got to figure out why you're getting that kind of guff. And if you don't care, then why are you doing social media in the first place? I thought that was really good advice. Do you want to expand on that at all for us?
No, people just react to when you're passionate about something, and so be careful about what you get passionate about. I guess. For me, the tip is be careful of who you add as a friend and what inbound you put on your screen. I mean, I have a bunch of people on Twitter that are streaming to me right now, and they're all handpicked. They're all people who are in the tech industry who are teaching me something interesting. And if they turn not into if all they do is start posting cat photos, I unfollow them, right? Because that's not what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about seeing the future. And so, if you're running a social media team, you really need to think about your inbound, who you listen to, and who you what you put as your outbound, what kind of content you put out there.
Right. And then the other tips from the Trapster post that we've alluded to a number of times on the show that Robert wrote back in January, you gave 3 recommendations, Robert, of how to gain trust when you're going to go over the freaky line that I think are very appropriate for us to highlight given our conversations here today. Your first tip is to disclose everything you're doing to gather data. Your second tip is to make the data correctable. If there's a way to fix something that's wrong, that's going to go a long way toward establishing trust.
Yeah, what I meant by that is I live on a golf course, or a golf course goes around me. I don't quite live right on the course, but there's a course. And because of that, some of these apps, not Google Now, but competitors to Google Now, keep telling me about golf stuff, golf lessons and golf deals on golf clubs and golf balls and golf clothes and stuff. I hate golf. I don't like golf. I don't ever want to learn golf. I don't want anything to do with golf other than I live on a golf course. And I can't correct some of these systems, so they make me trust them less. And they don't behave the way I would expect them to. And I can't tell it that you're not behaving right. And that bugs me out. Google actually, on the first one, if you go to google.com/privacy, you can see almost everything that they collect on you. And that makes me trust Google, because at least they're being honest. Hey, we're collecting data on you on searches and on emails and on calendars, and they show you how to do it. But they don't do the other 2, which is let me turn it off, and which is the third one, and let me correct data that is incorrect, or let me augment the data that you're collecting on me.
Right. That's a really big point. If you're, asking people to give you their private data in exchange for the convenience you're going to offer them, you better not be annoying them all the time instead of making things more convenient. That could definitely undermine trust. And the turning it off is key. And that one I think is hard for companies to want to do, because if too many people turn it off, then they don't get valuable data.
Yeah.
All right, and our resources of the week, we've got a couple of them. Evan, you'll like this one. I called it a lexicon for disruptors. This is something that I think Fred von Lohman pointed me towards. It's at io9.com, and it's 20 crucial terms every 21st century futurist should know. It includes things like covalence, multiplex parenting, which that has to do with having 3 genetic parents. And one commenter on the site says, wait, multiplex parenting, is that when I drop the kids off at 3 and go see the Lego movie? So there, longevity dividenend, effective, Effective philanthropy?
Altruism.
No, effective altruism. Some really neat concepts here. Did you have any favorites, Evan?
Well, I liked number 4, substrate autonomous person, because this reminds me of, I think of Searle, I guess, was the philosopher, thinker, futurist that talked about, different computing substrates supporting consciousness. So that really resonated with me, because this is the whole notion of the crazy idea, probably not tenable on our current understanding of neuroscience. So I want to be not too, starry-eyed about it, but being able to download your consciousness and your memory bank into a machine, and then all the crazy questions that come from that. I like that. If it not being confined to a biological substrate, but something else, some other computing substrate to support your intelligence and your consciousness is one of just the most mystifying and baffling concept I can conceive of in my consciousness.
Right. And then one final resource is on or around February 28th, I think it was on February 28th, the White House had a student film festival, and there's a post up at the Fix at the Washington Post blogs that has some highlights from the student film festival. I threw it in here because these are the people, in addition to the technologists, who will be disrupting the film industry. And there are some fun films from 5th graders, for example, that you can check out and enjoy. As the author of the post says, stop motion transformers answering questions about the meaning of life, what's not to like. So you can go check out those student films and all the rest of our resources and all the stories we've discussed today at delicious.com/thisweekinlaw/251, where we've got all of those aggregated for you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and let our illustrious and wonderful panel go on their way and enjoy the rest of their Friday and their weekend. Robert, so great to chat with you today. Evan reminded me that you were on my old show, IT Conversations, and I looked it up during the show. And you were actually on the inaugural episode of that show way back in March of 2005. So I'm glad here back in March of 2014, we're still chatting away.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure watching your career over the years.
And yours too. Anything you want to final note or plug before we go ahead and let you go?
No, Rackspace pays me to study the world of the future, and it's a lot of fun.
We can tell because you're very transparent about it, and that makes a lot of difference when you're having fun. So we're really thrilled that you could join us today, and we hope you can do so again sometime.
Thanks.
And Larry Downs, you're, as you said on Triangulation recently when you were on the TWiT network, a semi-regular on the show. We hope you'll continue being a semi-regular because it's always wonderful to chat with you. Your analyses and your writings and your ability to put them into such understandable format for us all are greatly appreciated. And we love it when you come on.
Well, thank you very much, Denise. And it turns out, now I know, it really basically takes me 40 minutes to get to the studio from my house, and it almost takes me that long to get down the stairs to my home office. So this is definitely the better way to do it.
Oh, good. Well, we'll have you come back to the studio then, too. That's always fun. Evan, great to see you.
Yes, the same. Wow. This has been a really fun conversation. Looking forward to it all week. Robert, great to talk to you. And Larry, great to talk with you again. It's been so much fun. And Denise, looking forward to seeing you here again next week for all the fun stuff we unpack Friday to Friday.
Yes. And my dad's birthday is coming up next month. I'm giving him copies of both Robert's and Larry's books. He's going to enjoy them thoroughly, as I have too. So you should get out and enjoy them as well if you haven't done so already. And if you'd like to enjoy more episodes of This Week in Law, or you're unable to join us when we record live at 11 o'clock Pacific time, 1800 UTC, then you should head on over to our show page at twit.tv/twill. And you'll find our whole archive of shows there. We get great people to come on this show. I can't figure it out, but they do. And we hope that you enjoy that as much as we do. We'd love to hear about more people that you think we should have on the show, or more topics you think we should cover. Email us. Evan is evan@twit.tv. I'm Denise at twit.tv. Or find us on Twitter. I'm D. Howell there. Evan is Internet Cases there. Or head on over to our Facebook or Google Plus pages, and we'd love to chat with you in any of those formats. Thanks so much for joining us on This Week in Law. We'll see you soon.